Merhaba, hoş geldiniz. Biz bugün oldukça heyecanlıyız. Çünkü Dirimart bu sergiyi aslında 2009'dan bu yana bekliyordu. Ben 2009'dan bu yana ekipte değilim ama Hazar Bey'in bunca yıldır sabrının ve emeklerinin sonucunda oluştu bu sergi. Bunun kanıtı olarak da aslında bu dergi kapağıyla başlamak istiyorum. Bu Dirimart'ın hazırladığı Res dergisi ve Vik Muniz'in işi 2009'daki bir sayının kapağı olarak basıldı ve aslında bu serginin macerası da yani Vik'le işbirliği de bir şekilde aslında o zamandan bu zamana bir şekilde böyle ilmek ilmek örülerek oluştu. Nihayetinde geçen sene Vik ve Brezilya'dan galerisi Daniel Rossler ve Hazar Özil hep beraber kolları biraz daha sıvayıp işi hızlandırdık. Ve nihayet bugün Vik aramızda ve sevgili Daniel Rossler da Brezilya'daki galerisi bizi burada yalnız bırakmadı. O yüzden onlara çok teşekkür ediyorum. Çok kısaca Vik'ten bahsetmek gerekirse Vik kariyerine heykelle başlamış ama kısa zamanda fotoğrafa olan ilgisine odaklanıp görüntülerin farklı materyallerle oluşturulması ve çoğaltılması üstüne odaklanıyor yapıtlarında ve bunları yaparken aslında pek çok farklı malzeme kullanıyor. Günlük olarak karşımıza çıkacak ve bunu bir yapıtta kullanmayı direkt aklımıza getirmeyeceğimiz şeker, elmas, çer, çöp gibi malzemelerle farklı görüntüleri kullanıyor. Örneğin eski dergilerden, müze broşürlerinden, kartpostallardan bunlardan büyük bir koleksiyon yapıp çeşitli kolajlarında bunları da kullanıyor. Vik Muniz'in sayfalarca uzayan bir CV'si var. O yüzden pek sergilerinden söz etmek istemiyorum. Sıralamak çok zor olacak. Aynı zamanda kendisinin küratörlüğünü de yaptığı pek çok sergi var. Yine kendisi hakkında hazırlanmış yayınlar ile kendisinin katkıda bulunduğu uzun bir yayın listesi var. Eserleri MoMA, SF MoMA, Whitney Museum, Victoria Albert Museum, Tate Gallery gibi pek çok büyük müzenin koleksiyonlarında yer alıyor. Bazılarımız onu 2010'da çıkan ve çok fazla ödül alan Wasteland belgeselinden de biliyoruz. O filmin de odağındaydı. Rio'daki büyük bir çöplükteki orada çalışan ayıklayanlarla ve onlarla beraber yaptığı sanat eserleriyle onları biliyoruz. Dolayısıyla aslında hani pek çok şey sayılabilir kendisi hakkında. Ben çok da fazla uzatmak istemiyorum. Bütün bu sanatçı kimliğinin yanı sıra bunları aslında bir şekilde sadece kendi ne başarıyı almakla kalmayıp içinden çıktığı topluma da çok fazla katkıda bulunuyor. Yakın zamanda son birkaç yıl içinde UNESCO İyi Niyet Elçisi oldu. Bunun yanı sıra da geçtiğimiz 2 yıl içinde Rio'da adını yanlış söylemek istemiyorum. Vidigal favelasında ücretsiz bir okul açtı. Bu okul o bölgedeki, o mahallede yaşayan bu favelalar oldukça problemli, gerilimin yüksek olduğu ve eğitim olanaklarının fazlasıyla iyi şekilde ulaştırılamadığı mahalleler ve bunlardan birinde kurduğu bu okulda sanat, tasarım ve teknoloji eğitimi veriliyor ücretsiz olarak. Biz de böyle bir kişiyi burada ağırlamaktan çok memnunuz. Sizlere de hepinize geldiğiniz için teşekkür ederim. Bugün aynı zamanda Brezilya konsolosluğu da bizi yalnız bırakmadı. Konsolosluktan Deputy Consul General Felipe Flores Pinto da burada. Kendisi de hoş geldin demek istiyor size ve Vik'e. Şimdi mikrofonu ona bırakıyorum. Çok teşekkürler.
Não quero saber como é que eu mudo.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Merhaba. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude on behalf of the Brazilian Consulate General in Istanbul to Mr. Hazar Özdil, to Ms. Ceren Erdem, and to Ms. Merve Ertütüncü and everybody who contributed for this lovely night and for this activity. I'm very happy to be here tonight. I mean, and, to share this experience with one of the greatest Brazilian contemporary artists, Mr. Vik Muniz, who, let's say, who has a very eclectic, very varied and respectable work. I mean, who makes, I mean, following the best canons of, maybe, if I may say that, the pop art, and make a nice critique of the industrial society, and also through the use of ephemeral materials. I think that's the technical term. And he's a very accomplished artist that who work also with very different media, with painting, sculpting, and even movie making. I mean, he's an accomplished, has participated in some very important documentary projects in movie making. And he has, I mean, he has held several international exhibitions in New York, in Dublin, Lima, Tel Aviv, Buenos Aires, Atlanta. He is particularly famous for his involvement in a documentary film, Wasteland, that has earned several international awards. And his art is marked by the, let's say, the unpredictable use of materials and familiar images for new interpretations of classic works that are part of our common sense. And so we are very excited to be here, and you hope through his work you can also become more familiar with the Brazilian way of life and the Brazilian way of relating to the world. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Teşekkür ederim.
If it's very bad, I can just disappear if I press this button. Thanks. Okay. It's being translated. I thought somebody was talking on the phone. Thanks. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I know it's. We were wondering if somebody was going to show up because the weather is so bad. Before everything, I'd like to apologize. My Turkish is not very good. And although this is my third time in Istanbul, I've been twice here as a tourist. And it's the first time I have a chance to show my work to this, it's very important and exciting city. I've been always very intrigued by the culture here. And it's, I mean, the reason we show works all around the world, and we have the possibility to do this, is actually to see how the work will fare with different audiences. And I'm really truly excited to be able to show my work to a Turkish audience. It's the first time, and I hope it's doing well and the message is being carried through. I always feel a little bit awkward when I'm talking to a group of people. It's one person here, a whole bunch of people there. I always think of what is it that I'm doing here? Why me? Because everything conspired for me not to be here. I grew up in Brazil. I was born in Brazil. I was from a very poor family. I lived in the outskirts of São Paulo. My father was a waiter. My mother was a switchboard operator at the local phone company. We didn't have any art books at home. We didn't really have anything, very little reading materials. And I wasn't brought up to become an artist at all. My story, but also that has a lot to do with the fact that I'm here. My first memory, when I'm thinking about the first thing I remember, I'm sitting in a sofa with my grandmother. Her name is Ana Rocha. She grew up in a small town in the interior of Brazil, in a time where women didn't attend school. She never had one day of school, and yet she learned how to read by looking at her children's books. She looked at them so hard that she taught herself how to read. Nobody knows how she did it. She's my grandmother. My first memory, I'm sitting with her in a sofa and she's teaching me how to read by just passing the fingers through words in an Encyclopedia Britannica that my father had won in a card game. She's telling me names of like Jararaca, Urutu, Cascavel, and I'm savoring every word as if they had a shape, they had color, they have substance. It was like a sort of a braille, even though they were names of Brazilian snakes. I remember that lesson in the snakes' names, even like as if it is today. By the time I was 5 or 6, I already knew how to read, and I was reading chapter books. When I entered the school at 7, I was a good reader. I was starting to read Jules Verne and in Portuguese, some translations. They were like teenage books about police stories, like the Hardy Boys and things like that. But to my surprise, it wasn't good. I started, because I had taught myself how to read completely different than most kids my age. I learned how to read by memorizing the entire shape of words or parts of text. So when I had to relearn how to read with the phonosyllabic way, it was very hard for me. So it took me 3 years until I could write a word on my own. And in this time, every time I took dictation, the teacher tells me what I have to write, I can never write it, so I started making little drawings. So my copybook looked like the Egyptian wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It looked like all hieroglyphs. Nothing could be recognized in it. And I was the only one who could decipher all of that. And slowly, I think that the fact that you start making little drawings, you start making them again and again and again, pretty soon you are the guy who draws. Everybody has a person like this in your school, somebody who could draw better than the others. And that kid turns out to be the one that makes caricatures of teachers and spreads them around. I was that kid, and I drew compulsively, mainly out of the fact that I could not read or write very well. Obviously, I learned how to read and write. By the time I was 14, I still kept drawing, and a teacher of mine picked up on my books, and he sent me to talk to the principal in the school. And I went there. I thought I was going to be punished because I was drawing during a math class, and instead I realized that I was invited to be part of a contest, a festival, an arts festival for public schools at the time. And it was the first time I spent a day with kids that were just like me, kids that were strange and they liked to draw. To my surprise, that was the day itself was a reward. The fact that it felt normal to be able to just communicate through images the way I was doing. But I even got even better. I got a first prize in this festival. And as a reward, I got like a scholarship to learn academic drawing. So I was 14, and I spent my entire afternoons, after school, I would go to to the art school, and I would draw naked people. I didn't miss one class. It was, it was great. And there was something, when you start learning to draw, one thing that happens, it's a little bit, you learn substantially in the beginning, so there's a sort of a curve. You start learning, you start drawing better, then it's like when you lose weight, you start, the improvements, they start coming in smaller increments. Around that time, I started thinking about other things besides just creating representations. Drawing is a lot more than that. You start observing because you expand your idea of what you're doing, and drawing is I said, how is it that we can see something in a picture, that we can sense the space that goes beyond it? How is it that we can actually live through pictures, and that we have managed to create these extensions? What's the story of it? I first tried to answer these questions through in a very personal way, through my senses. And I started reading books on psychology that were available at the time in Portuguese. There was one particular book by James Jerome Gibson. He's one of the first, he's a Princeton scholar, one of the first researchers on perception. He did it as a commission for the Air Force at the time because they were starting to develop jet fighters. And they wanted to improve the interface of the jet fighters. So this guy had to understand how we gather perspective and how do we sense things visually. So I was eating this information and trying to figure out how I could use that to make better drawings, to understand what I was doing. For many years, I thought that I would become a psychologist. An experimental psychologist working in the field of perception. Unfortunately, I wasn't a very good student, and I tried twice for the School of Psychology in Sao Paulo without any success, and I settled for a half scholarship in advertising. I took advertising because I thought in advertising I could use a lot of my interest in psychology, in representation. And I was also very much interested in not only in projecting representation, I became very interested in theater at the time. So I thought, maybe that would be something that I could do. And for somebody who drew well at the time, my ambitions as an artist did not transcend like making drawings for a newspaper, working as an illustrator or something like that. So I would be at the right field. If I told my father at that time that I would become an artist, he would just probably slap me. And he'd just say, no, you're not going to become an artist. You'd be a banker, you work for the post office or something like that, things that he could understand. And yet, my parents were always very supportive of me. Something around the first year of college that I could not ever read the signs, the billboards around my city. I could try to read them, and I could never read. And I thought this because I was a self-taught dyslexic person. Once I was driving my mother to the bank, and I said, "Mom, can you read that?" And then she looked at this sign. She said, "No." And then I went around the block, driving like 10 kilometers an hour slower. And I said, "What about now? Can you read it?" And she said, "No." I went around the block again and kept going slower and slower until she could read it, and I started making notes. In 6 months, I assembled like a sort of a chart that crossed vectors of speed, angle of approach, and the font and the number, the size of the words that one person could possibly read at a certain speed, coming at a certain angle to an image. I use that knowledge even today because I still think that my pictures, they rely on physical presence and approximation. I got at the end of the year, I actually got a job in a company called Alvo, Target, that dealt with billboards around the town. I came to them and I said, you have to hire me, otherwise I'm going to your competitor. And they said, okay, fine, you have a job. They pay me very little. And at the end of the year, I got a prize for my invention, you know. They gave me a plexiglass trophy. The night when I was to receive this plexiglass trophy, I rented a tuxedo for the first time in my life. I went to this place, didn't know anybody there, you know, have a drink, received the thing, said thank you everybody. And as I was leaving, you know, I parked my car in the back of the event. When I was in front of the door, a woman stopped my car and she said, you have to help me because my fiancé is being, somebody's beating him up. Please help me. So I left the car, went there. In fact, there was a guy hitting another guy. They both wearing tuxedos. Looked like a James Bond film. And with brass knuckles, you know. He was hitting it. So I broke the fight apart. And as I was going back to my car, the person who got hit reached into his car for a gun, and he decided to shoot the first person wearing a tuxedo that he saw. And, you know, I saved the guy, and the guy actually shot me. Obviously, it wasn't fatal, you know. And I woke up 3 days later in the hospital with the guy who shot me, asking for forgiveness and asking me not to press charges, you know. And he paid for the hospital bills and for some money that I used that money to go to the United States in 1982. So if I didn't get shot, I wouldn't be talking to you here today. This is what I'm doing here today, you know. I'm here because I got shot in the leg. When I arrived in the U.S., I went for a few months mainly to learn English, but I thought of studying theater. When I went to New York, I decided to stay. And the first thing was I said, I'm going to start working with theater. But theater in Brazil was informed by a sort of an exit from politics, where my generation was tired of pamphletism, tired of like discussing politics over and over again. It was all about content, it was about the message. And we started thinking of a theater that was more about the mechanics of theater. We forgot what theater was. And there was a bunch of troops, theater troops in Rio, making a brand of theater that was very exciting, very circus-like. And I thought, maybe this is what I should do. I should start studying theater. But in New York, the avant-garde was basically coming from the punk movement. So you had like people like Richard Foreman and other companies that did like, it would be in the stage, there would be like 40 middle-aged men naked screaming obscenities for 4 hours straight. And you had that, and then you had Cats, you know, and nothing in the middle. I really didn't feel that there was a place for me to do anything there. And for a few years, I just drifted along, and I did what every artist do when I started working as a bartender, as a house painter. I was repairing paintings, and I lived in the East Village. The East Village, this neighborhood of Manhattan, it was very cheap to live in, but also because it was very cheap, attracted a lot of artists, and also a lot of galleries. There were galleries that the size of the bathroom of this gallery here. And the galleries were very nice. They used to tell you, come see my show. You know, they don't do that anymore. But also it was a sort of a cultural mecca where you see everybody, you know, there were clubs, they were in illegal places, but everything seemed to be happening there. And I got to meet people who were actually my age, and they were living from what they were doing as artists. I had never before contemplated becoming a visual artist, you know. But there's something that happens, you know, there's a lot of young people here, and you consume culture for the beginning of your life. You read all the books, you read all you see all the films, the TV series, you hear the songs, and all of a sudden you have a sense that people your age, people who read the same books, heard the same songs, saw the same films, starts to producing a culture from that knowledge. It's like when you're surfing, you see it coming, you know? And when you see that movement, you have to really roll fast because that's your wave. I started seeing people around me, especially like in the East, like people like Cindy Sherman, Jeff Koons, people who were a product of media like I was. I am the first generation of artists who were directly influenced by electronic visual media, meaning television. I watched a lot of television. And I also, the first generation of artists who had an enormous amount of information that looked like lived in an environment where there was a surplus of channels, you know, in excess of information. And I think this is, you start becoming confused, you know. A lot of the generation that made it their mark during the 80s, like meaning Cindy Sherman, Koons, Bickerton, in New York, they were artists that were actually demonstrating the fact that they were trying to find a place between their physical selves and their presence in a much wider environment, media environment. When you see Cindy Sherman, this American photographer, she's like picturing herself as a character of films. She's actually projecting herself in these situations. The same way when we watch a film, we think of ourselves as some part of the main character. You know, we're really messed up. You know, especially I'm talking about 30 years ago. We got a lot worse. But I think I had something to say about that. So I decided, also I had friends who didn't draw, didn't know art history as I knew, and they were showing galleries and making money. I was working as a framer. I said, I'll give it a try. And I think that the first thing I decided wasn't making images. I said, I'm going to make things. Because it was exactly the balance between theater and the image. You know, my interest in theater, it's very present in this show, and I'll explain you why. I'm not interested in pictures, you know, by themselves. They don't say anything to me. I'm interested in how pictures can demonstrate the fact that how we interact with the world. The pictures have always an element of physicality, of presence. When you watch a film, the film delivers you the story. The story is happening in the screen of the cinema, or it happens on the screen of the television and nothing else. When you are in a theater, you have two things going on. You have the story, but you have the character, but you also have the actor, the person that's there. You have a split. That is very interesting to me. I find that you know, the fact that you have to trust the two sides. For 20-something years, I get students asking me, what is art? It's a very difficult question to answer in a very synthetic, very simple way. And actually, after 30 years, I managed to get a really interesting answer to that. Art is the evolution of the interface between mind and matter, between thinking and the phenomenon that exists out there. Art is what helps us, and has helped us since the Paleolithic period, deal with what's beyond us. You know, how that the universe, the world that's external to us, enters our mind. It really, I don't think it's anything beyond that. And this interface has to be constantly evolving, because this world that's beyond us keeps changing because of technology, because of a number of issues. I could have done work that was to be put in a book, that was to be, that could even, you know, even today could be seen on the phone. But I decided to make these really heavy, big things that you have to carry, put on trucks, fly on planes, bring it to other countries at an enormous cost, and they put on a wall so people can see it with their bodies, you know. There's a significant difference, and a very important thing, because galleries like this and museums have become places where we ritualize visual experience. The trivial way in which we receive visual experience is the way we do it one way or another, by looking at our phones all the time, by just seeing the billboards that pass on, or on signs that go on buses. Images, we're being bombarded by images on a daily basis in ways that we don't even think about anymore. When you decide to go to a gallery or to a museum, it's your will. You are moving towards the picture and not the way around. And there's an enormous power in it. You are in control of the situation, you know, and that's very important for you to feel that control, because for once, you're thinking about the way you deal with pictures. You wake up, you pay a bus ticket, you pay the museum fare that you have to pay, if there is one, and then you go to a museum and look at a picture. And then you walk towards a picture, and you walk towards it as if there was a line. Everybody stops at the same place. Why do they stop at the same place? It's because we have similar bodies with, you know, our angle of field of vision is very similar. And we stop at the same place because from that place we can do this and enter the picture, and we can go like this and go back to the museum where we started that journey. We can sense the way we can, really our mind goes into another dimension, the dimension of the picture, and then go back. It's safe that way. But then we continue doing this. Everybody does this, you know, in museums. And the reason they do this is because from that distance they can see a picture. A picture is something that was created in an artist's mind. It's an idea. And when they go close like this, they see the material from what that idea was produced. They see the pigments, the medium, all the things that mainly come from the ground. You know, they're like very mundane things. And they see idea, material, mind, matter. And they go back and forth because it's the moment the art happens exactly is not in the way you see what the artist intended or when you see what it is made of. It's exactly the moment when you cross the path and you feel that you're crossing the threshold that separates your mind from what's out there. You know, it's by feeling exactly the moment where you go from material to mind. I think that's the sublime in art for me. And we've been polishing this thick wall that, say, you know, 30,000 years ago separated us from, you know, what was around us. We've been polishing this with technology until we get to a point where we have something very thin, very sublime, which is the photograph. The photograph has aspects of both the physical world and the mental world. It's very thin, it's very light, but it's material. Something has happened during our lifetime that changed dramatically the tradition in which you have experienced with images. See, there's an unbroken line from the first picture ever drawn in a cave in the south of Spain, you don't know, some 50,000 years ago, all the way to the latest things that you have in digital imaging. There's one line. I call it the picture project, you know. We're trying to create the best possible interface between mind and matter. But something happens in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s, that sort of created this story, although it's unbroken, you know, it has been subjected to a lot of revolutionary shifts. The invention of photography is one of them. And then you have another very important and recent one, which is digital imaging. Somewhere in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s, there were amazing technologies that were invented that enabled anybody to change and to break our trust or break our relationship to images the way we had fostered since, the Paleolithic period. We have learned to trust the images to represent things. And the same way people trusted paintings or historical paintings in the 19th century, we evolved to even trust them images even more after the photography was invented, because it was something that was unrelated to the whims of human invention. So a photograph meant something happened. It is interesting that right now, photographs are not accepted in courts anymore, because the power of the manipulating photographs is so great that you have to really think about what a photograph is. You have to really think what a photograph is. It's a good thing good place to start. In 1839, when photography was invented, the first thing that people said the day after is that painting was dead. And in fact, photography didn't kill painting. Photography liberated painting from its necessity to portray the world around it. After that, painters were free to do whatever they wanted. We live in a similar time now, in which photography is being haunted by the ghost of painting in the form of digital imaging. And this is the moment that we can say photography is dead. But is photography dead? No. We have to rethink the medium of photography. And this is why I think my choice to work with photography and paradoxically working it in a scale. Why would you make a big picture if you can just get closer to it? It's the fact that you have to you have to make your way through it. What I was saying about the painting, that as you get close to it, you get more detail. With photography, with the artifice of scale, you can amplify that effect. You can make it look more material. In my pictures, you always have something of theater. You have the character and you have the actor. It's always a material trying to become something else. I have done works, maybe I should start showing some of this. When I started working, I didn't want to work with images, because I thought I work first with matter. I'll start with something tangible, something that I can hold on. So I made these pictures, these objects, they look like they had identity problems. This is the clown skull, like some remnant of a race of entertainers from Brazil a long time ago. This is a shanty joystick. It's like for you to play video games. It's so old, it's for Atari. This is the whole Encyclopedia Britannica in one volume for travel purposes. This is a Tupperware sarcophage for a pharaoh that really didn't want to get spoiled. This is a nail fetish. Oops. Oh, they took the other one. There was a tombstone too. When I was making these objects, I finally got a gallery to show them, and they sold some pieces, and they brought a photographer one day to take pictures of the pieces. It changed it completely. When I saw the guy come with two assistants, put beautiful lights, once the pictures were made, I didn't need the objects anymore. I said, I have the pictures. You can just throw it all away, because I already have pictures of it. But then I looked at these pictures. They're beautiful transparencies, 8 by 10, taken with a big camera. And I looked at something was wrong with them. Something was something awful. Something's wrong. They were great pictures, professional pictures, but there was something wrong with them. I looked at them for a long time, and then I realized one thing, that in order for me to know what was wrong, I had to redo them. So I went to, those are the right pictures, right? I went to the wrong store, bought the wrong camera, loaded with the wrong film, exposed it to the wrong exposure, took it to the wrong place to develop, and when I looked at the pictures, they were right. It had to be something other than, chauvinism. Or that I looked at it and said, why my bad pictures are right and the good pictures are wrong? And it's actually very simple. If you're a sculptor and you want to make a sculpture that looks just like a glass of water, right? The moment you think about that sculpture that you're going to make, you think of it from a very specific angle. As we grow old, we lose our ability to rotate objects in our mental, visually, in our minds. Autistic people, children can do that much better than grown-ups can do. So when you think of an object that you want to make, it comes as a picture. You look at it from here. And then you actually make the sculpture that is a glass of water, right? And then when it's made, it's physical. It came from that idea. You walk around, and when you finally look at it from the angle you had thought before, you close a cycle, and you feel something was achieved. Obviously, the photographer who took the pictures professionally, he didn't know what I had thought before I made the picture. That's why my pictures were right and his. And I started thinking about the picture inside. This picture is very necessary. Whenever you see something, recognition, it means thinking twice. You have to actually know something in order to be able to understand what it is. It's very hard to see how language starts. At that time, at the same time, I was like I had this book called The Best of Life that I lost. It's a book that a lot of American people have this book. It has all the Pulitzer Prize winning pictures. Everybody knows these pictures. And I lost the book and I started thinking, what are these images when I'm not looking at them? So I started drawing the image from my head, from memory. So some of them I could draw, more or less. Some of them were harder because it's hard to draw like remember facial features. You remember just a few things, but the important thing is that I was just doing it from my mind. See, what was the picture inside my head? I was offered a show to show these pictures, but I thought the drawings were very bad because it took, for 2 years I did these pictures and I was just drawing on them with whatever I have, ball pen, pencil. The drawings were really horrible. But I was very close to them. I didn't want to sell the drawings. So what I did, I photographed the drawings, and I was supposed to sell the pictures and keep the drawings. But when I photographed the drawings, I photographed them slightly out of focus to take the marks on my hand, and I printed them with the same half-tone pattern that I had seen these pictures for the first time in a book. So it was another circle fulfilled. When I showed these pictures, nobody asked me what they came from. Nobody asked if they were real. They only said that they were badly printed. And for instance, I never got sued by any of this AP or, Which year? This is 88, 89, yeah. But I never got sued by any of the photographers because they're so different. See, if you look at this, you remember the picture, but this is what actually happened. And that helped me learn a lot about how I think I invert a lot of these pictures in my head. For some reason, I have a sort of a mirror effect. But it was informing my memory. It was, you had to see something before to be able to recognize it. So I thought, what about simpler things like clouds? When you look at clouds, you see what you see. So if you know what a snail is, you know that the snail is there. So what I started to make in these clouds that look exactly like what you could recognize. Obviously you had to know what it is. If you look at a cloud and the cloud depicts the picture of Didi Korkut, on top of a horse. And if you're not familiar with the Turkish epic, the cloud is just a cloud. It's nothing else. But when you look at this, for instance, this is a cloud but this is a lump of cotton, but this is a guy rowing a kayak. Are three things, but you cannot think of these three things at the same time. We have something, a handicap called attention, that only allows us to think of one image in one particular way at one particular time. So when you think of a guy rowing the boat, you lose the kayak and you lose the cotton. And when you think of cotton, you lose the other two. This is called a multi-stable image. I didn't invent this. These things exist for a long time. They had them in Firenze, in the Renaissance. And also, one way to split is not through material, and you can split through technique, which is very interesting. In Lorenzo Ghiberti, he did the Doors of Paradise. He used two different techniques. One was relief, which existed from a long time, as a century-old technique, and he used perspective, which in the 1500s was a brand new invention. When you put those two things together, the same way when you get photography and drawing together, your mind gets locked in the middle. You try to read it, and you get trapped in an image because you don't know what it is. So I started making these pictures that shared a little bit of those dynamics. So you look at it, you think it's a pencil drawing. But at a certain look, you realize that's not a pencil drawing. It's a photograph of a sculpture made out of wire. And you start thinking, how big was this? How long did it take to make it? Is it three-dimensional? Is it flat? And before you know, you're not just looking at a picture, you're thinking about the way you look at pictures. These drawings, they're very keen to me because they're very simple. The way you always think of a drawing as something that tries to represent something else. But the drawing is a lot more than that. Say, if I just do a gesture, if I do this, what is this? The sun. The sun, I brought the sun to this room. The sun is a humongous ball of fire, 8 light minutes from here. And you can bring it with a gesture. This is magic. It may not seem like magic now, but 30,000 years ago, if I did that, people are going to go, whoa, man, this is amazing, But drawings, I don't want to really fool people with representation, but I want to show people a measure of their belief. How much they need to be fooled to be able to see something in something else. For that reason, I cannot compete with people like George Lucas or Steven Spielberg. These people are doing the best possible type of simulacra, the best type of possible of representation. I want to work on the other end. I want to make the worst possible illusion, but the illusion that's going to let you think about, how did I fall for that? Simple trickery, but they're very illustrative. They really make you meditate upon the way you get to see something in an image. So I started with simple things like wire drawings, and then I started exploring things more complex. I tried to make landscapes with wire, but wire is very hard, so I started making them with thread. And I named these pieces after the amount of thread that I used. So there was like 50,000 yards. Let me break here. 24,000 yards after Corot. You notice that these are like small, they look like etchings, but you have two different types of depiction here. One is a perspective. There's a physical, topographical, if I have to say, depiction, and the other is a perspective depiction. And they don't go together for some reason. Either you see thread, or you see the guy looking at the tree, at the end. I also have these pictures. I made them, like the one before had 24,000 yards. This one had 10,000 yards. I like this one better. But collectors who bought the pictures, they want the ones that have more thread in it. From line to points, this is a natural way in which pictures were made. I went to this island of St. Kitts, and I think I was becoming familiar with the negative when I was printing, and I also wanted to work with points. It's funny because, I took a vacation. I was playing with these children in a Caribbean island. And I got to know them, and I got to know little things about them. It's very important work to me because it sets me off in a number of other projects that I did later, which had to do with childhood too. So I was playing with these kids, and then at the end of my vacation, I knew a few things about them, and I had taken pictures of them. And one of the kids, actually, this kid here, her name was Valentina. She took me to meet her parents. And they were vibrant, sweet, beautiful children, very playful, very energetic. Their parents, however, were tired, sad, heavy, laden people, And I kept thinking, what was that was taken from these children for them to become adults like that? And these are people who work 14-hour shifts in sugar plantations. And it was sugar, The sweetness was literally taken from them. And I decided to make these portraits made with sugar. It's actually, to my surprise, drawing with sugar is a lot easier than to draw with a pencil because you don't have to erase it, it just go like this. And it's quite easy to do it. I was about to quit my career as an artist because it was very hard at this time, but because of these 6 little portraits, I managed to get a show at the Museum of Modern Art, and then a good review at the New York Times, and then in a year and a half later, I had my first retrospective at the International Center of Photography. So I owe my career to these kids. But also, I started thinking about how to make a picture more complicated. You can go beyond just the visual aspects of the picture. Taste. How many of you have ordered food at McDonald's? And just to find out that I want that one, and it doesn't look anything like it, So the relationship between, because when you look at that, sometimes it's so bad that you have to eat looking at the other picture, So in order to be able to stand it. But the relationship between visual stimuli and taste. When you think about the sugar, if I said to you that those pictures are made out of salt or cocaine, they would mean something completely different. And also, those take a long time to make. I wanted to make something very quickly, very fast, that I could test the idea. So I made people kissing and people killing each other with chocolate to see how the tension between material and the image would work. So the first person who could explain chocolate. Chocolate is I wanted to work with something very complex. The reason I work with many different materials is not because I'm crazy or because I like to do so. It's because every single material sets you in a different process. So if I work with oil paint every day, I would only have that as a process. But if I work with chocolate, chocolate has some properties that I have to learn how to work against. So if you choose to work with different materials, you also work in creating, challenging yourself to make art differently all the time. So Freud probably could explain why everybody likes chocolate, almost everybody. Chocolate is an invention that is an industrial invention, but it's also a social invention. They say chocolate is romantic. It's brown, it's gooey. It's not romantic. It could be too. So I decided, these are very large pictures, so you can see all the little things in the chocolate. And the idea of taste is very interesting when it comes to it. This is like my own plate of spaghetti that I did. There are things like that plate took me literally 3 minutes to do it. I was eating, doing a chocolate piece, I did that, photographed it, and in 5 days it was in the cover of the New York Times, Arts and Leisure. My plate of food, very funny. That piece, it's made out of loose pigment, like sand, colored sand, that I manipulate with the help of dental tools. It took me about 5 months to make. And I have to work with a mask. So if I breathe out, the whole thing, if I sneeze, the whole thing is destroyed. And if I breathe in, I die because that's cadmium. So it's like very strong poison. But the piece before it in 3 minutes, this I took me 6, I have to sell them for the same price. It's very unfair. This is a similar piece made out of, I started working with, also when you work with the work of other artists, you extend the complexity of the picture too. I did a lot of things with the grammar of picture. So a picture is made of a color, a medium, and it's made of a support. So I decided to work only with the medium, only with color, and then I decided to work just with the support, which is paper. Paper is changing in the digital era. It does no longer serve the same purposes, and it's something that's becoming very challenging to understand what paper does, because I am from a generation that was informed by paper. Now paper basically documents things. I started to make in these collages, there are 5 layers of paper, and then later photographed. But they're photorealistic. They're very difficult to hey. Yeah, let me see. Okay. You see, there was, I'm sorry, there was a mistake in the presentation. There was another very large collage where that girl, maybe from very fact now she looks very good looking, right? Because she has high cheekbones. Every single piece of paper is cut by hand. But when you come close, she looks like a jack-o'-lantern, those pumpkins that Americans cut for Halloween. Because our brain finishes up. We have very bad eyes, like our eyes are really, really crude. But we have very good visual cortex to actually, a good computer to put those images together. I started also, I quit doing things with the materials, and I started doing things with objects, like with toys, for instance. In this case, the challenge is to do a drawing that doesn't look anything like this when you draw, because it's photographed from an angle. So on the floor where I make this drawing is very long, and it's trapezoidal. It's like this. It's an anamorphosis. But only from here, it's very hard to see here, but the pieces on the bottom are twice as big as the pieces on the top. The perspective is corrected, and you see the drawing. So you see it in perspective. I did other ones with different kinds of toys. And then I said, why not do it with large things? So I rented a studio in the outskirts of Rio, in which I could get next to a junkyard. So I could get all sorts of things like oil drums, televisions, computers, old stuff, and assemble them together and create these tableaus. This is one of them. The size of this is the size of a basketball court, And they also photographed from an angle, from a 20-meter high tower, you photograph that. I'm editing a lot, because each series like this, normally they have 20, 30 pieces. Earthworks is something that, when you make something big, it's so big that you don't feel, you cannot see it. So this is art that was done in the 70s and 60s that inspired me a lot. Especially because you never seen it. You have to rely on a picture. You have to think about it, And I started to do this on my studio to see if I could fake it. But that was not fun. So I worked with a mining company in Brazil. And it was, I didn't want to cut trees, so I worked in a time where China was buying a lot of iron ore in Brazil. So I had this, the place where they pile the iron was very low. So you have these huge expanses of space where I could make drawings. So with the help of GPS and retro diggers, I made 30 really large scale drawings in Brazil. Some of them they can still be seen from Google Earth, and they can be seen from commercial aircraft, if you're flying by. But the drawings are utterly stupid. They're really very dumb images. They're like stuff that you find in very simple, like sign here, the lawyer gives, just sign here, the big hand, a ruler. The earthworks projects in the 70s by American artists, they're always abstract. I wanted mine to not only to be figurative, but to be dumb. So you don't think about the subject, you think about the process. And when I showed these pictures, I showed that, you can see like here there's a person, oops. We'll go back. Yeah, this is a small one. It has about 250 meters. This one has, I think, 500 or 600 meters. And I did this because in Brazil they changed the way the outlets look. And I was so mad that I said I'm going to make a homage to the old type of outlet. You see, here's a building right here. Oops. Also, when you look down, when you're in this thing, you don't see the drawing. But also, I was thinking about the clouds again, and the idea of making public art that was would just go by, and it would be very huge. Everybody could see it simultaneously. And I wanted to make clouds that look just like clouds. So with the help of airplanes like this, I drew first in Arizona. I tried to make one. And then I did Miami, Pittsburgh. Every time I get money to do it, I'll do it. It's expensive because it's not like now they do the typing. This is like very few people can do this. And this is the first one I did. It looked really awful. It's terrible. It looked like a hat. But I was pretty happy I did it. Then I did this one over Manhattan in 2001. It was right before the World Trade Center attack, so you won't see anybody doing little clouds over Manhattan for a long time now, yeah. And this one I did something that looked just like a cloud, and still I got a letter from a woman that her son had died, and he used to be a baseball player. And the day the cortege was going on West Side Highway, for his funeral, everybody looked up and they saw a baseball glove, in the sky. And I said it wasn't me, it was the wind. But this is really cool, because if you'd be walking like on the street, all of a sudden you see a cloud going by like this, but it's a drawing of a cloud. Same way you do big things, I think of how things are so small that you cannot think of it. This is my equipment that I've been working with. I have no idea how it works. It's called a fib. A focused ion beam. With this, I make images like this. Well, it's missing some pictures. What you see here, it's a grain of dust or a grain of sand. Where with that machine, I can etch a drawing of a castle, and I made all these castles I did with the use of something called camera lucida. It's an equipment that it's from the 18th centuries, before photography was invented. So I made these drawings using this apparatus. There's something for you to copy what's in front of you. And which is 18th century technique, and using 21st century technology, I etched them in a grain of sand. This is so small that if this grain of sand was this big, a single hair of yours would be about 2 or 3 times the size of this room, the width of this room. When you look at it here, you see that there's other things here because there's no way to clean that. Like a hair of a brush would be too big. This is another work I do. I work at MIT. Something that looks like the wallpaper of your grandmother. And then when you come closer, oops, sorry. These are like liver cells. I managed to make pictures out of human cells. The way we do that, we get a 1 by 1 millimeter. It's much bigger than the things I did before. And we make a relief. And we use the telescope, we focus just below the relief. So we only focus where the cells. When I made this, I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to make many different cells now. And in fact, it wasn't that easy because liver cells, for instance, they are sluggish. They stay in the same place and they reproduce very quickly. Like cervical cells, they have cilia, so they move about. So the scanning process is different. Every time, so we used stem cells, and now I'm trying to do a circuit board. I had a picture, but it was taken from the presentation for some reason, with neurons. Neurons are very expensive, and they don't divide. Or optical cells don't divide, either cardiac cells don't divide. So you get to learn a lot from doing these things. This is the pictures of garbage that are featured in the film. That is a film called Wasteland. It was nominated for Oscar a few years ago, 2001, in 2011. It didn't win, unfortunately, but when you start working as an artist, what you want to be, you want to become an artist. And 20 years later, you're asking yourself the same question, why am I doing this? It's not to become an artist because I'm already an artist. And I really needed an answer to that. I say, what is it that I do? What does it do? What does it do to me? What it does to other people? And so in order for me to prove that point, I asked a group of people. They had nothing to do with art. It's never been around art. And I brought them to my studio to work with me. See, I share my work with people like I'm doing right now, talking to you about it, or when I have a show like this, But sharing the process is something that I had never done before. I really wanted to know and to work with these people to see how, if that would work for them as much as it did to me. And the film is a 3-year period in which I start working with them and what happens after. It's not because I'm in it, but it's quite a beautiful picture, and I think it does explain the value and how art humanizes us. Art makes us see that interface, and that how our world extends beyond the immediacy of our senses. It is a very important thing, and then the film seems to prove that, not only to the people who watch it, but especially to me, it was very important. And these pieces, they're much more than what I can show here. The film, this is the poster for the film. It made me think of garbage. Garbage is something that we have inside ourselves too. We are constantly seeing things. When we look through like web pages or when we look through magazines, we're editing the content that we want to read. But everything that we're actually looking at and not apprehending, we're actually bringing it in, And opposite to these pictures, where you see where garbage is very simple, You want to make a picture, you put garbage on where you want it and you put it where you don't want it. Our minds are not like this. We're not very binary. We don't have empty spaces where we can put nothing. We don't create content by hygiene. In our mind, images are layered upon layered upon layered. It is mostly the fact that what we differentiate from foreground to background that makes us see things inside our heads. When you see a zebra like this, the fact that you recognize this as a zebra is because you're comparing it to all the zebras you have seen throughout your entire life. You have an entire inventory of zebras. That's why you see the zebra. And the fact that influences the way you're looking at this particular zebra. Everybody sees zebras different ways because you've seen different zebras. Now, there was the sound of the film. Something is wrong with this. Now, you can cut the sound. Sir? Somebody's, yeah. The same way I work with the magazines, when I was a kid, I didn't have many pictures of myself. Actually, this is me when I was 2. I had, because we didn't have a camera at home, I had an aunt that came from Miami every year, took pictures of me, and she would bring the picture she took 1 year later. When I tell this to my kids, they laugh at me. I said, why didn't she show you, like, she take the picture, why didn't she just show it to you, like, from the back of her phone or something? When I started, I went to the US, I see pictures for sale. I never understood that, because I thought, who's selling the pictures? Because I had 9 pictures of myself as a child. They're very dear to me. When I see pictures of people who actually pictured that became orphans, you know, I start buying them. I did it, today I probably have around 250,000 photographs of people I don't know. People who are probably already dead. And the fact that I kept collecting them actually kept me from being able to see all of them all the time. And all of a sudden they started living in boxes, and they're not just orphaned, but they're dead then, you know. And I wanted to bring them back. So photo albums are very interesting. Every photo album is the same. It starts with a baby picture, then there's a school picture, there's the christening, bar mitzvah, or whatever. Then they have the first vacations, first girlfriend, on and on until it stops somewhere. Every photo album tells the same story. It tells the story of a human being. The only difference is the character in it and the scenario, you know. I thought of making the pictures that you see in every photo album, you know, but with all these pictures that I had at my disposal. This was dramatically reduced. I'm a little, you know, sorry about that. So I made like the wedding picture, the vacation picture, the school picture, with thousands of little other pictures. I also collect postcards because they're totally useless in the time people have Instagram. But the postcard is something that signifies a place. You know, the same way for personal, you have one person, the other one is for people. A postcard actually tells you what to think about when you think about a city. When you think about Paris, most people think of something like that. The Eiffel Tower is always there. There's a curve of the Seine, and these little buildings that look like that. But when you picture Paris in your head without seeing that, you know, those buildings, a lot of them are buildings from Istanbul and from whatever other place you've been to. You just put something together that looks like Paris or looks like the postcard of Paris. The experience of a city is completely different. It's very fragmented. So this is what I wanted to show. It's like to show a city how you feel. This is all the works that I do based on... Something's not working here, I'm sorry. I just added this because it's something I did in Venice. Working with the scale of things also, I went back recently to work with sculpture, so you have that piece called Lampedusa, which is it was a boat that probably the size of this gallery that was on the Grand Canal about 4 years ago. And this is one last thing that for about 15 years now, I've been making the perfect reproductions from the backs of the world's most famous paintings. This is the back of Starry Night. But it's an actual object. So what I do, I go to the museum, I ask them if they can take the piece out of the wall, which surprisingly, they usually let me do it. What I do, I scan the size of the piece, photograph it, and document it very obsessively until I get what I want. And then I make the pieces by copying all the labels that are in the back. The reason I do this is that when an artist finishes a piece, the front of the piece, it's supposed to remain exactly the same for centuries. The back is completely different. The back is always changing. Every exhibition that you have, a show, it gets a stamp, it gets a little label. People drew holes in it, you know. It's a painting that something costs like, you know, $20 million. People are not afraid of putting a nail through it or writing something in the back because it's the back of the picture. So the back of the picture tells a number of stories. It looks like the studio of the artist. It has the signature of the artist. You know, it's something quite fascinating. This is I did the Mona Lisa. I bugged the people at the Louvre for 6 years until they let me do it. So the Mona Lisa only comes out the first Monday of November every year. And when it does, nobody's allowed inside the museum but 25 people, the people who care for the Mona Lisa. There's no security, no maintenance. So this year I came and I did everything that I did, including here, see, there's this thing here with the little antenna. The Mona Lisa has a crack right about, right about here. There's a little crack. It happened in the 1700s, and it was fixed in the 1800s with the help of a butterfly joint. So they have all this apparatus right here to monitor if that crack doesn't widen, because it's painted on wood. So if that crack widens 1 micron, somebody gets an SMS. And somebody from the museum, you know, gets to know that something is wrong. So I asked the guy who made it for the real Mona Lisa to make it for mine. We had to buy a tree in Tennessee to be able to cut the wood exactly like Leonardo did. It's exactly the same. So the 25 people had come every year from the Uffizi to care for the Mona Lisa. I came the year later, and it was so cool because imagine in a day that no security in the museum, no maintenance in the museum, everybody's around. You come into the Louvre with a box that says Mona Lisa. It comes out to the box that says Mona Lisa. It looks like you could steal it. So that day I put them together, and the people from the Louvre, they were out of the room. We did like this with them, and they had to guess which one was the real one, and they got it wrong. This is how the exhibition looks. They look like the exhibition is not up yet. But here is Sunday in the Park by Seurat. That is, no, this is the anatomy lesson. That is Red Studio, Demoiselle d'Avignon, and so on. So now my next project is in Vienna. I'm doing the Kiss. I'm going to Norway to do the Scream. And we're working now, the next museum that we're going to work with is the Prado. We're doing Las Meninas, which is very exciting because a third of Las Meninas is actually the back of a painting. So it's a painting, the back of the painting, the back of the painting. This is what the exhibition looks like. It doesn't look like much, but it's every single, like to do anatomy lesson, which is right here. We had to, it was painted on a linen. They had a pattern that we could not do it anymore. You know, it was what do you call a herringbone pattern. So we had to hire somebody in upstate New York. They had an 18th century loom that could actually weave the pattern. But then the linen, you know, we had to thread the linen from scratch to be able to make the linen, the cloth to be able to make the back of the painting exactly like it was. But you see it is every inch is exactly the same. It's very obsessive. Oh, and I think this is it for today. Thank you very much. Do you have time for questions or something?
Well, if anyone has questions.
Do you have questions?
Okay to take questions.
Yeah.
İngilizce sorarım. Thank you for the presentation. I mean, everything is very, I really enjoyed all the things that you showed and talked about. So what came to my mind was, I see it as if you're challenging, like what Walter Benjamin wrote in the 30s, the loss of aura with the mechanical reproduction and so on, and as if you're challenging that loss of aura by building works that are like very present and very just present at the moment, and you kind of challenge all these notions and conventions of visual communication and so on. But then we're still in the age of reproduction that is like at a way more different level than in the 30s. I mean, it's all about reproduction and so on. And for example, we are in a gallery where, I mean, I was looking at these works. I think they're also reproductions, right? They're not, or yeah. So I was wondering, like, with all your efforts in your work, how do you deal with the notion of reproduction and, like, I know that you're like all the appropriation works that you're doing. You kind of play with that in the essence of your work, but you can't really escape from the fact that we're in a world that everything is so much copied and it's bound to lose its aura.
Well,
how do you deal with it? It's kind of like the dilemma of Banksy, maybe, like what they do in the practice of art or in the general. I don't know if I made my question clear. How do you position yourself?
If I got it right, yeah. I don't think we're always bound to go back to Plato's cave, you know, where we all see shadows of ourselves. Also, we're always bound to the fact that we can only access an understanding of reality through illusion, through means of representation, one way or another, you know. Our own ideas about how reality is built around us. It's got a lot to do with linguistics. It got a lot to do with representation. I think what it is, there's an unfolding. What Benjamin did in the 30s, you know, he was very keen on defining that particular moment, which is obviously was right before mass media, you know, took the dimensions that it did today. What is interesting, what happened is like, what was lacking in aura in his time, we learned to actually see it through the development of technology. You know, we started seeing an aura within an aura. And I think if I can bring out somebody else, so it's Marshall McLuhan, you know, to sort of define, saying like the medium is the message, you know. Also, the content of a medium is always another medium. And I think this is very accurate, because when he says that, it's like once you have a radical development in the way technology works, you know, you have to sort of reboot the whole belief system. I think what we have, you know, I mean, some 60,000 years ago, a guy walks inside the cave and he looks at something like cracks on the wall. He couldn't possibly see something novel. It had to be something that he had seen before. So he's seen something that looks like an animal. And then he looks at it and he goes like, oh, but it's not like an animal, it's a bison, it's a particular bison. No, it's not like any bison, it's like the bison that we hunted last winter when we were very hungry. And then he remembers, you know, hunting the animal, the rush, the run, the blood, and then the taste of the meat when they had a big feast afterwards. And then he looks at it again, it's just a crack on the wall. And then he gets something, a little blunt thing, and goes there and draws the missing tail or the tusks or whatever was missing. And then all of a sudden those images, all those memories come back again. That's the first artist. And I think from that particular, the great thing about that is that by inventing representation is probably the greatest invention after the control of fire. Because not only he could actually bring into that room, like I did with the drawing of the sun, something that was not there, but he could also share that information. So he could make that experience of hunting that animal available for people after he had died. That is like the layering, you know, of knowledge that we understand as history today comes from that. I think we have gone, you know, this is like the awe that probably these tribesmen felt when they look at those drawings. Or the same thing when people, during the Renaissance, when people started developing you know, perspective. They said that they avoided making perspective frescoes at floor level because people would just bang their noses against. They believed that they could just walk through it, and they weren't aware that was just an illusion, right? I think there is that since that thing, what happens is like a week later, after the guy made that drawing, somebody, they were all, oh, it looks like that bison. And a week later he went there, somebody went there and said, well, but it could use some color, right? And then he would paint some color. And then he would just put a shadow. And then I think what started there was a race between technology, image technology, and cynicism, or the consciousness that is just an image. And what Benjamin said about aura, in his seminal work, it was exactly the moment there was a certain stretch that he could look back and measure that confidently, that something was lost. He was one of those guys that went to it and say, oh, we could use some color, And I think I think that aura started to become, manifest itself when illusions became even better. So I think sometimes we just have, it's a flow of, we think it's missing something, but then technology brings us something else, and then it goes like, wow, it's there, just for a while, and then it vanishes. And what is interesting is that the wave in which these processes actually have been imprinting in our way of looking at the world, they usually to be very long, and it looks like they're going very short wave now because we become enchanted in this illusion almost on a daily basis by things now. And I don't know, if you ask me, I don't know how that will lead us. But if that, I don't think, if it would be either foolish or overly ambitious on my part to think that I could ever transcend this membrane that separates, represent the reality to knowledge or to consciousness. I don't think there is anything that could do that. And we are bound forever to dwell into the realm of illusion and representation. I don't think we can escape that one way or another, independently of the amount of aura that any image can carry. Any other question? Yeah.
When you deal with the history of art images, sorry, because I have close. When you deal with the history of art images, do you consider yourself as a recycling person? Because you had this beautiful movie too, and when you talked about this movie before your talk, I considered you as a recycling artist as well as the persons in your documentary.
There was the idea of appropriation is something, is probably not the right term, because my work developed around a time where this was overly used. So it was you get Sherry Levine, Cindy Sherman. There was a lot, not Cindy Sherman, Sherry Levine. Who was another appropriation artist? There was Morimura. There was a whole context for artists to say, I can just take something from history and make it now, and the fact that I'm doing it now will make a completely, that would be the context. The change of context will be the content of the work, right? You could just make the same picture and just to actually show that gap in itself was enough for an artwork to be significant. I don't really agree with that. What I think is I learned how to draw by making copies. And I'm not an appropriator, I'm a copyist. When you make if you appropriate something, you imply it's a conceptual attitude or act. You're saying, I stole an image and now that's mine image, or you can do it for a number of reasons. The fact that you cannot copy something exactly the same implies an enormous amount of sincerity in it. Even if you get a child to copy a very important work, the fact that you cannot do it very well, that is very interesting because it shows the difference between one thing and another. I like to think of we've learned to look at the world through these icons. And when you try to redo them, the fact that you only have certain means to do it, or you have a certain attitude about it, and the fact that you can, I'm never trying to diminish or to criticize or to mock or to make any commentary on the art that I'm actually working with. On the opposite, I'm actually pointing to its significance. And then the fact that just by trying to copy something, you're actually showing a certain development or a decay or a difference between something, between the original and what you're trying to do. When you're making pictures, the fact that you're copying it, an artist like Gerhard Richter, for instance, right? He's one of my favorites because, or Courbet is another one, because both these artists, they were very interested in the process of image making, and they rely on different in different processes to be able to achieve what they did. When you look, I have a picture of Richter, which are the tree made out of thread that I showed before, right? You know, when you go, okay, this is a picture of a sculpture as a sort of a situation made out of thread, based on a painting that was based on a photograph that was inspired by an etching by Rembrandt. So the more layers you add, the more obstacles you create. So the reading of that picture is not direct. So when we tend to look at things and believe them immediately. When you look at the picture of the girl in Trembang that's being sprayed with napalm, you know, she's like this, and immediately you see the girl, and you never wonder about the guy who was taking the picture had the camera very low, and he was walking backwards, even though the napalm was being sprayed around, you know. Pictures are, you know, they're like, they have a lot of intention in them. They're very specific. They don't show the world. They show a very edited version of the world. They're very opinionated, you know. And when you, I think the more, when you, it's not what it was, it's how somebody saw it, that particular moment. And then I think when you create, the more layers you put, the more complex you make a picture. You have to solve little puzzles before you go to the next one. The more interesting, I call it, there's a frontal narrative, you know, like it's what I was talking about. When you come to a picture, it's like you get to a point that you, through your senses, you've learned whatever you had to learn from it. But then you start wondering about the story, the process of that picture. And then you can go on for a long time. You can go on forever if the picture inspires you to do so. I think the reason I have relied on works by other artists is just because it creates an extension of that process. You know, you just go from that, you can go with the history of other pictures, and it just makes them more interesting. And also, you know, I've learned about art, like many people here, from reproductions. You know, it took me, before I got to my first museum, I went to MASP, the Museum of Art of Sao Paulo, and it was in a time where they still had, they did it again now, which is wonderful. They had Lina Bobardi, the brilliant Brazilian architect. She made the paintings hang on glass, glass surfaces. So as a 7-year-old, I looked at the paintings. It was like Caravaggio, all this, you know, Moran, the other. And then I looked at it. I was like, Raphael, there's a Velázquez. I wasn't interested in painting, but I was really curious about the back of the piece. There were little spider webs and things in it. And I never forget that experience. Adriano Pedraza just put them on glass again, and I was so glad he did it. But I think if you know, I have. Like stay on the shoulder of giants. I think that I'm a product of a development that, you know, call it art history, called the history of pictures, called the picture project. And I cannot, also I have relied on it so much, I just have to show how much, you know, these things have informed me. It's a way for me to sort of like acknowledge that as well. Yeah?
Türkçe söyleyeceğim. Öncelikle hoş geldiniz.
Okay, somebody's going to have to translate it to me.
Kulaklık getirebilir misiniz arkadan? I'm going to ask for
For me? Oh, that will be very hard. Can you just hear her and translate to me?
Yes.
Okay. Tell her.
Okay.
Okay.
Öncelikle hoş geldiniz.
No, should do it because I already have too many things here in my head.
Ben sizi Çöplük filmiyle keşfettim ve ilk izlediğimde gerçekten çok hayran oldum. Hani ben daha 22 yaşında bir öğrenciyim henüz. Kısmet şu an sizinle konuşuyorum. Öncelikle şey sormak istiyorum. Şimdi bize eserlerinizden, çalışmalarınızdan bahsettiniz ve gerçekten bunlar her insanın aklına gelemeyecek şeyler. Peki bir çalışmayı yaptıktan sonraki aşamayı düşündüğünüzde hiç kaygı hissettiniz mi? Şu an gerçekten çok başarılı bir çalışma yaptık ama bundan sonraki çalışmamda ya bu kadar başarılı olmazsa diye hiç kaygıda bulundunuz mu? Bunu merak ediyordum.
So she's like, you're producing this like very successful works and you were like. Like so.
Well,
About like what's next.
I think that the hardest thing in an artist's career is to manage creative impulses. You know, like if you what you're going to do next. It's very difficult because you have your own impetus. You feel like doing all kinds of things, but they have to make sense. And a lot of times I do not make sense, you know, because I'm too excited about things that I'm doing, and I create things that fall outside the line of thinking that I should be having. And I think it's okay, because look at that. I've just made I made big exhibitions, like retrospective exhibitions, you know, comprehensive exhibitions. And then I also make I just made a catalogue raisonné, big book with everything. When you make something like this, it looks like you're dead already. You know, you just, because mostly dead people have these things. But if I don't remember things, nobody's going to remember for me. But I have, when I look through these books, I realized that there's a lot of things that I did that I stopped. I just did a little bit and didn't do anymore. Because I didn't have the money, I didn't have the time, I lost interest. So when I look at my work backwards, I see a straight line from the moment I did my first drawing to right now I'm talking to you, right? But when I was on the other end, it was a huge path, you know, and I could go anywhere I want. It was, in fact, it was an infinite number of ways that I could go about things. So the real structure of a work of an artist, it's a little bit of the two things. It's straight, but also it has branches, you know? And these branches are sometimes, they go up and sometimes they just stop. It's very good to look at the work, to organize yourself and look at the work like this, because when you understand the whole structure of it, you get to see some of these branches, right? And you go, like, I just worked on, like, for 2 years, I've been working one of these branches, you know. I said, well, 20 years ago, I started doing these abstract things. That, and I used to cut the pictures more than I do now. Once I started making large pictures, I never cut the big prints because they cost a lot of money to make. Why would I cut them, right? And then recently, I bought a inkjet printer, and I'm cutting the pictures again. And for the last 3 or 4 years, I'm making a series that I didn't show here called, because they don't make any sense when you show it on a picture, called Handmade, where I actually gluing actual pieces of things on top of pictures. So each piece is unique, and I'm going back to working on the surface of the photograph, you know, something that I hadn't done for a long time. And this is like, it's good, because you go back sometimes, you take a little step. But I think one thing that is very important, and I learned from it, is to be completely irresponsible, you know? Because if you try to control, You know, if you think of becoming a successful artist, your chances of becoming a successful artist immediately diminish. You know, you have to be the artist that you don't know what it is. You know, you have to try to become an artist all the time. And you have to be very truthful, you know, to your impulses. So, but it's true that sometimes you think, oh, let this idea be here for a little bit, I'll develop it later. I learned something, for instance, that I no longer make drawings. We went to some Pamuk Museum of Innocence, and I thought they had very interesting drawings. And I felt like, well, it's nice when I used to make drawings, right? Because I feel like when you make a drawing of a project, or that's something, you killed it right there. Because that drawing is going to look, so you're going to make something that looks like that drawing. But if you just think about it, you know, and that sometimes if you forget, it's good because you're supposed to forget. But if you continue thinking that there's this idea here, it's going to come with another idea, they're coagulating something a little bit more, and all of a sudden you wait enough, you have something that is ready to be put into practice and is ready to be produced. It's like a letter soup, you know. They start making words if you wait long enough. But I think a lot of people, I've had the two things. A lot of people are always saying, why you do so many things, you know? Because I feel like it. I cannot help. I have to work in at least 3 or 4 projects simultaneously. If I don't do that, I get bored. And I work in series. All these works, they are series. They're like, sometimes they wield 5, 10 works, sometimes they wield 40 works. And I have to respect that, because when you learn how to make something with something else, like you figure out a process, right? Sometimes it starts with an image, and if it starts with a family of images that you want to do, that usually you make just a few, because it's a point you want to make, you go after a material. And sometimes you work with the material and you start looking for images to work with that material. And when that happens, you know, in the beginning you cannot do it very well. Some of these pictures, like the faces, I couldn't do very well in the beginning, so they always hide in the face. And then you get better, you get better, you get better. So there's a curve. I work in series because that allows me to apply the knowledge from one piece into the next, you know. And for me, the works themselves are not the masterpiece, what I want to do. It's actually the group of works that will get me experience and knowledge to be able to carry that experience through. For me, it's like there's a curve. You know, you start, oh, eureka. It's never like this. Good ideas make bad art. So normally you leave it, you know, leave it there. All of a sudden you start working with something, you do not work very well, but I love these first pieces. They're not very well accomplished, but they're good. You know, they're full of energy. And you start working with them until they start getting very good. You start making them like amazing. And then you start losing interest, and the curve descends, and all of a sudden you don't make them anymore because you're already, but this is the need. I need to develop something else at the same time, so you always have an up wave somewhere along the process. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.